What's up, guys? This is the Flashy Bro 25 podcast. Today we're going to talk about the tariffs war. Who's winning, U.S. or China? The way I look at it, both sides, they are not winning. If you look at it, China is basically going through their own issues right now too, even with the U.S. Because if you look at the end, everyone will lose in this terrorist war. No one wins. You look at the suppliers of China, they will have no buyers from the U.S. company. That's a lose right there. And also for the American side, the price will trickle down to the consumers. So basically, us as Americans gonna pay more. So you look at it, nobody gonna win. If you really sit down and think about it, it's better to try to work together and try to prove who's stronger or flex the muscle and stuff like that. So this guy named Cyrus, he's good in breaking it down. So let's take a look.
Just fine. It's in a trade war between the U.S. and China, China wins. China does not depend on the U.S. market very much. It's about 12% of China's exports. China will do just fine. It's just dumb policy. We are in one-person rule in the United States. Our political system is in a state of collapse.
Well, it's official. Donald Trump is accelerating the collapse of the U.S. economy and dragging America's global standing down with it. Meanwhile, China's president is traveling around the world, securing new trade deals with the fastest growing economies and preparing his country for this intense next chapter in U.S.-China relations. Tariffs are Trump's weapon of choice against China, but the on-again, off-again nature of these tariffs has created complete policy whiplash, confusing governments, rattling international markets, and making it nearly impossible to predict what's coming next. Even on this channel, it's been a challenge to bring you consistent updates as the goalposts are shifting every other day. But one thing hasn't changed. No matter how this ends, China is going to win this trade war. Unlike the chaos in Washington, Beijing is moving forward with discipline. After being caught off guard during Trump's first administration, China has spent years planning 10 steps ahead. Every time the US makes a move, China hits back with a calculated counterstrike, knowing exactly where to apply pressure. And now it's becoming painfully obvious. The Trump administration had no plan, no foresight, and not even an understanding of how tariffs actually work. Trump keeps repeating that tariffs will make other countries pay back the US, when in reality, the cost is being eaten by American businesses and passed straight to the American consumer. In today's video, we're breaking down the current state of Trump's trade war, exposing the damage it's doing to the American economy and showing why, no matter what he does, China is walking away with the win. But make sure you stay tuned to the end, as I'll show you a direct way that you can profit from this chaos. And it comes from one of the most vulnerable industries in the world, in a sector of the economy in which China controls 90% of global production, and that is rare earth minerals.
And especially President Trump, I think he should try to, don't let his ego take over his logic, common sense. Hopefully he sit down and think about it, what can he do to better himself or to better everybody else,
But a deal. Trump's team wants you to believe that Beijing is desperate for access to the US consumer market, and as a result, America holds all the cards. This is what happens when a country starts believing its own propaganda. Take it straight from the mouth of billionaire Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick.
The table with Donald Trump, or they don't. But let's be clear, we are their biggest client by far, by far, by far. The American consumer buys everything from China. They can't afford to be without us, and that's where we are today.
Lutnick and Washington are stuck in the 1990s. They think the US is the unchallenged center of the global economy, and that everyone else is just trying to sell into it. But this outdated American exceptionalism has become a massive strategic blind spot. While the US consumer base is still significant, the days of it being the global engine are long gone. The real growth is happening elsewhere, and China is now the top trading partner to the majority of the world's countries, a far cry from the US-dominated world map some 25 years ago. And that shift matters. While the US is stuck fantasizing about the golden era that no longer exists, China has spent the past decade building a real economic future. From Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia, Beijing has been investing, trading, and forming relationships. Meanwhile, Americans are drowning under inflation, watching their rent skyrocket and their grocery bills pile up. This is not a country of consumers with spare cash for new high-tech Chinese products, as 60% of Americans are just trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. So when US officials claim that China needs access to the American market, they're completely detached from reality. Not only are they overestimating the American market, they are highly underestimating the Chinese market at the same time. Contrary to the outdated stereotypes, China's economy is no longer dependent on export. As this graph from the global economy illustrates, exports now make up just 19.7% of China's GDP, a far cry from the 36% peak in 2006, showing a rapidly decreasing reliance on exported goods and an increase in power from the domestic Chinese consumer. To put that in perspective, the average percentage of a country's GDP coming from exports is over 45%. That means that China, at 19.75%, is actually much less reliant on exports than most countries. China has become its own best customer, with 80% of China's economic activity now coming from domestic consumption. And while American officials still picture China as a sweatshop churning out cheap goods for Walmart shelves, that version of China has moved elsewhere many years ago. China's #1 export destination hasn't been the US for almost a decade. The #1 partner since 2016 is the ASEAN bloc, where trade has been steadily rising. At the same time, the percentage of Chinese exports to the US have fallen from 19% in 2018 to under 15% in 2024. Beijing planned for this shift. Washington hasn't. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is starting to wise up. Countries that once played along with American leadership are now openly pushing back. Even some of Washington's closest allies are calling out the bullying.
What the US is saying is already an impossible task. The theory is already a mess, and there is no consistency whatsoever. However, if Japan were to negotiate about what they have been saying, well, to put it bluntly, it would be akin to a delinquent kid extorting someone.
That's a Japanese government representative going as far as comparing the US to a mafia-style extortionist. And it's not just talk. Japan and South Korea have signed new trilateral trade agreements with China in direct response to Trump's tariffs, overcoming long-standing strained relations. Meanwhile, Vietnam, another country with historically tense relationship with Beijing, welcomed Xi Jinping for a high-profile visit and signed a record 45 new trade deals. We are seeing in real time that the United States is being isolated as the world is rearranging itself. And Beijing? Well, quite frankly, they've stopped playing nice. In contrast to their more traditional, more passive reactions to America's actions, Chinese government officials have started posting notably defiant statements, standing their ground and calling out the weaponization of tariffs to coerce and bully other nations.
China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. Right. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
That's quite the bold statement from Victor Gao, the vice president of the Center for China and Globalization, who doesn't sugarcoat how Chinese people really feel about Trump's actions. I mean, you know things are going crazy in US-China relations when the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. is sharing videos of Ronald Reagan to help Americans remember why tariffs never work.
Over the past 200 years, not only has the argument against tariffs and trade barriers won nearly universal agreement among economists, but it has also proven itself in the real world, where we have seen free trading nations prosper while protectionist countries fall behind. America's most recent experiment with protectionism was a disaster for the working men and women of this country. When Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930, we were told that it would protect America from foreign competition and save jobs in this country. The same line we hear today. The actual result was the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in our history. 1 out of 4 Americans were thrown out of work. Yet today, protectionism is being used by some American politicians as a cheap form of nationalism. We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world.
Trump is now being forced to back down. He's granted wide-ranging exceptions for Chinese products, especially tech, like iPhones and computers. This is after industry leaders and CEOs like Tim Cook reportedly begged him to reverse course. Apple warned the Trump administration that iPhones alone would cost thousands, if not tens of thousands more dollars if they were produced domestically in the United States. The US simply doesn't have the capacity to rebuild those supply chains anytime soon. In response to these exemptions, Beijing still hasn't lifted its tariffs. In fact, they've escalated, slapping export bans on heavy
Yeah, so I hope both countries can work it out, the U.S. and China, and come to a good agreement. So it will make better for everybody of both countries, to prosper together. But anyways, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Flashy Bro 25 Podcast, and don't forget to like and comment, and what else should I talk about next? Thank you.